I didn't believe in haunted houses until my friends and I stumbled upon Old Creek Manor. Now, I just wish I could forget those whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. It all started as a typical weekend adventure. I, Alex, and my best friend, Martha, decided to explore an old abandoned mansion on the outskirts of our town. According to rumors, the last owner had disappeared without a trace, and since then, no one dared to approach the place after dark. Upon arrival, the mansion stood imposing and desolate under an overcast sky. The wind played with the broken windows, creating a chorus of wailing that seemed to warn us not to enter. Ignoring the discomfort that the place provoked in us, we crossed the main door. Inside, everything was covered in a layer of dust and cobwebs. Marta, always the bravest, proposed to make a recording for the channel, narrating every creepy detail we found. With our flashlights in hand, we began to move through the corridors of the mansion, the floor creaking under our feet as if protesting every step we took. The flickering light from the lanterns cast grotesque shadows on the ancient portraits hanging on the walls, portraits of people with piercing gazes that seemed to follow us as we moved forward. "These guys don't look very welcoming," Martha joked, trying to lighten the mood, but her voice sounded strained. We decided to explore the large living room. Large torn curtains covered the windows, and a huge chandelier hung ominously from the ceiling, its crystals emitting a subtle tinkling sound, as if vibrating in the wind that blew through the cracks in the sealed windows. In the center of the room, a dust-covered grand piano seemed to be waiting for someone to play a melancholy tune. Marta approached the piano, ran her fingers over the keys, releasing a discordant note that spread through the vast space. It was then that we heard it for the first time, a barely audible whisper, like the rubbing of silk. We paused, our gazes meeting, both of us wondering if the other had spoken. We listened carefully, but only the wind answered with its melancholy whistle. Uneasy but curious, we pressed on toward the library. The door creaked open, revealing rows and rows of old books whose spines showed titles blurred by time. The room smelled of mildew and old paper. Suddenly, Martha stopped. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. Before I could respond, a clearer whisper filled the room, this time definitely a voice, though we couldn't discern the words. "Is anyone there?" called Marta, her voice echoing through the halls of silence. There was no answer, only the echo of her own voice fading away. As we searched for the source of those whispers, my eyes fell upon a book partially pulled from its shelf. Cautiously, I removed it and a small journal fell to the floor, opening to a marked page. The writing was hurried, almost frantic. The journal belonged to the last owner, and in it, he described how he began to hear voices that were not figments of his imagination. The voices told him dark secrets and warned him of a presence in the house, something ancient and evil that did not want to be disturbed. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I looked at Marta, her face was pale. "We have to go," she whispered. But before we could move, the whispers came back, louder, surrounding us, dragging us into the depths of the mansion. The whispers intensified, becoming a steady, hissing murmur that seemed to come from all directions. We held hands, determined to find a way out, but each step we took seemed to take us deeper into the labyrinth of shadows and secrets that was the mansion. We decided to return to the Great Hall, hoping to find our way from there to the front door. However, as we hurried out of the library, we noticed that the atmosphere grew colder, and our flashlights flickered as if they were about to go out. An icy wind swept through the corridors, kicking up swirls of dust and loose pages of forgotten books. It was as if the house itself was trying to stop us, enveloping us in an icy embrace. We reached the living room, but to our horror, the place had changed. The chandelier now lay on the floor, shards of glass scattered all over the carpet. The piano, once intact, showed broken keys and exposed strings. The atmosphere felt charged, like the air before a storm. Marta squeezed my hand tighter, her gaze full of fear. "We can't stay here," I shouted, but my voice sounded choked, almost eaten away by the oppressive air. We tried to run toward the entrance, but our movements became slow, heavy, as if we were moving through water. With each step, the whispers became clearer, now distinct voices speaking in a language we did not understand but felt deeply threatening. Suddenly, out of the shadows, dark figures materialized, barely visible, like silhouettes of black smoke. They moved erratically, sometimes human, sometimes distorted, twisting in the air. We stopped, paralyzed with terror. The figures drew closer, surrounding us, their voices becoming a cacophonous chorus that overwhelmed us with their intensity. Just when we thought we would be consumed by those shadows, a survival instinct spurred us on. Martha found an iron bar near the fallen chandelier and, with a scream, threw it with all her might towards the large mirror hanging behind the piano. The mirror exploded into 1,000 pieces, and the effect was immediate. The shadows emitted a deafening shriek and began to dissipate as if the shattered mirror had broken the spell that held them there. Taking advantage of the moment of confusion, we rushed to the entrance, finding it strangely clear. The front door was locked, but with a desperate push and aided by adrenaline, we managed to open it. The cool night air hit our faces as we stumbled outside. Once outside, we didn't stop to look back. We ran cross-country, getting as far away as our legs would allow, until the mansion and its horrors were hidden in the darkness of the night. Breathing heavily, we finally stopped, allowing ourselves to feel, for the first time in hours, the silence of the night with no whispers to disturb our peace. Despite having escaped from the mansion, terror did not leave our hearts so easily. We took refuge in my car, which we had left parked near the driveway. With my hands still shaking, I started the engine and we sped away from that cursed place. Neither Marta nor I spoke on the way back, each of us lost in our own thoughts, trying to process what had happened. Arriving home, the normalcy of my room seemed unreal, a stark contrast to the darkness and danger we had faced. But the silence was a blessing, and for a moment, I thought we might try to put it all behind us. However, as the adrenaline subsided, an unsettling feeling began to settle in my mind. That night, sleep was elusive. Every little sound in my house made me jump, and the shadows cast by objects in my room seemed to move subtly. My mind kept returning to the voices, the shadowy figures, and the violence with which reality had been distorted inside that mansion. The next morning, Marta called me. Her voice sounded tired and worried. "Alex, I couldn't sleep all night," she confessed. "Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those shadows coming towards me." I told her I felt the same way, that something from the mansion had followed us, or worse, had awakened something inside us. We decided to meet and talk in person, trying to console each other and perhaps find a solution. While I was waiting for Marta at a local cafe, my phone vibrated. It was a message from an unknown number. "You shouldn't have broken the mirror." My heart froze. How could anyone know what we had done? When Marta arrived, she looked pale and discomposed. Before I could tell her about the message, she pulled out her own phone and showed me a series of photos she had received. They were pictures of us at the mansion, taken from angles that suggested someone else had been there with us, watching. We stared at the photos, fear growing in our hearts again. "What if breaking the mirror didn't stop what was there, but released it?" said Marta, her voice trembling. The possibility terrified us. We had thought we were safe escaping the mansion, but it was beginning to look like we had only brought danger with us. We realized we needed answers. We decided to return to the old Creek mansion, not only to face the horror again, but to try to stop it once and for all. We knew it was a dangerous decision, but the uncertainty and constant fear were unbearable. Armed with more knowledge and renewed determination, we were willing to do whatever it took to close the door we had inadvertently opened. It was time to return to the shadows. We returned to the old Creek mansion the next day, just before sunset. We wanted to avoid total darkness, knowing that night amplified the power of what resided there. This time, we went better prepared, armed with more powerful flashlights, cameras, and an old tape recorder that Martha insisted on carrying, believing it might capture something our eyes couldn't see. The road back seemed longer than we remembered, each bend in the forest a harbinger of what awaited us. When we arrived, the mansion stood imposing and sinister against the twilight sky, its windows like black eyes watching us. "We're not going to let him intimidate us," Martha said, with an attempt to sound braver than she felt. I nodded, though my heart was racing. We walked through the front door, which was surprisingly open, as if someone, or something, was waiting for our return. Inside, the mansion seemed even more macabre than on our previous visit. Darkness hung over us like a heavy blanket, and the sounds of the old building creaked around us. We turned on our flashlights and the tape recorder began to spin, its tapes capturing the initial silence that would soon be interrupted by the inexplicable. Our first destination was the Great Hall, the place where everything had changed last time. The remains of the chandelier still lay on the floor, and a broken mirror reflected bits of darkness. As we approached, the temperature dropped abruptly, and an icy wind blew through the slits of the sealed windows, as if the house was breathing hard. Suddenly, the tape recorder began to emit a static noise. Martha adjusted it, trying to find a clear frequency, but then a faint voice emerged through the noise. It was neither our voice nor something that could easily be identified as human. It said something in a low, repetitive murmur. We moved closer to listen, and could make out the words, "Behind you." We turned quickly, flashlights in hand, but there was nothing but emptiness and shadows playing with our vision. Something had changed in the atmosphere, however, a sense of being watched, of not being alone. "Look at this," Martha said, pointing to where the mirror used to be. Among the debris and shards of glass, a small object glowed faintly. It was an ancient medallion, possibly silver, covered in symbols we didn't recognize. As I touched it, a wave of cold ran down my spine, and a series of images assaulted me, people in this room, dressed in period costume, their faces distorted by expressions of terror. We knew there was something about this locket, a piece of the puzzle that was intrinsically linked to the history and horrors of the mansion. We decided to take it with us, hoping that it might be the key to understanding and perhaps breaking the cycle of curse that enveloped this place. We left the room, the medallion in our possession, but with the feeling that each step we took us deeper into an enigma that perhaps we would rather never have unearthed. But there was no turning back now, we were too involved, and only by moving forward could we hope to find answers or, hopefully, an end to our anguish. With the medallion in our possession, we advanced deeper into the mansion, each step echoing ominously in the silent corridors. The weight of the object in my pocket was a constant reminder that, perhaps, we were getting closer to unraveling something very old and very dark. We decided to head for the mansion's library, a place we had avoided on our previous visit. I remembered that, according to local stories, the last owner of the mansion had been an avid collector of rare books and occult artifacts. If there was any information about the medallion or what was going on, we suspected it might be there. The library door creaked open, revealing dust-covered shelves filled with leather-bound books and piles of cluttered documents. The air was permeated with a musty, old paper smell. Marta and I turned on our flashlights and began searching for any reference to the medallion or rituals that might be related to the mansion's paranormal happenings. After several minutes of frantic searching, Marta came across a large, leather-bound tome that looked very old. We carefully opened it on one of the cleared tables. The pages were filled with handwritten notations and detailed drawings of various artifacts. Among them, we found a drawing that exactly matched the medallion. "This has to be it," Martha whispered, pointing to the drawing. The page described the medallion as a guardian amulet, used to seal or contain evil spirits. According to the book, the medallion needed to be placed on a special altar inside the mansion to reactivate its power and re-establish the seal that contained the entities. The problem was that the book did not specify where this altar was located. However, a page marked with a bookmark seemed to suggest that there was a hidden part of the mansion, a basement or crypt beneath the east wing where rituals were performed. Armed with this new information, but feeling time slipping away from us as the night deepened, we headed toward the east wing. The path was a maze of narrow corridors and descending stairs that creaked under our weight. Finally, we found a door concealed behind a large bookcase that, when moved, revealed a stone staircase descending into darkness. The air grew colder and damper as we descended, our flashlights struggling against the oppressive blackness. At the bottom of the staircase, we found an ancient chamber, with stone walls and a small altar in the center. The altar was empty, waiting for us to place the medallion. With trembling but determined hands, I approached and placed the medallion in the recess designed for it. Instantly, the air became charged with electricity, and a faint light began to emanate from the medallion. We stood in silence, watching, waiting to see if our actions had had any effect on the malignancy that seemed to permeate the mansion. It was then that the sounds began, a low murmur, growing in intensity, as if something very old had been awakened or, hopefully, appeased. As we watched the medallion and listened to the growing murmur, something began to manifest in the room. A dark mist began to rise from the floor, slowly enveloping us. The temperature dropped drastically, and a sense of oppressive presence filled the air. Suddenly, the shadows came to life, writhing and contorting as if they were living beings. A vortex of darkness formed in the center of the room, emitting an ominous hum that echoed in our ears. Martha and I looked at each other, fear reflected in our eyes, but also the determination to face whatever was emerging. We clung to each other, preparing for the worst. Then, out of the dark mist, a figure emerged, tall and spectral. Its form was blurred, as if composed of shadows and nightmares. His eyes glowed with an evil light as he watched us with a blood-chilling intensity. "Who are you?" I asked in a trembling voice, barely able to articulate the words. The figure slowly stepped forward, its presence seeming to fill the entire room. A whispering voice echoed in our minds, full of malice and antiquity. "I am the guardian of this mansion, the spirit locked for centuries within." Martha and I looked at each other, stunned by the revelation. We had released the guardian of the mansion, but it had not been an act of release, but of confrontation. The spirit was furious at having been locked up, and was now free to roam the mansion once again. But before we could fully process the situation, the guardian raised a grim hand and pointed toward the medallion on the altar. "The amulet no longer contains me, but my power is still great. Now, the mansion will be my realm once again." With a burst of dark energy, the guardian disappeared, leaving us alone in the chamber, facing the uncertain fate that now awaited us. Martha and I looked at each other, knowing that our struggle was just beginning. Old Creek Manor was still a place of terror and darkness, but now, we were the only ones who could stop the released spirit and restore peace to that cursed place. We held hands, ready to face whatever challenge fate threw at us, vowing never to forget the lessons learned on that night of horrors.